Hi there, I'm John Tickles, and welcome to Remote RPGs. The Sega Dreamcast! It certainly existed. It was a great system for its innovations like online play, but it was decimated by the release of the PS2. Now, I know the first remote RPG people think about when we talk Dreamcast is Skies of Arcadia, but I'd like to point out another lost gem on the system. The late 2000 sequel to a great game, Grandia 2, was released by Game Arts. The game received universal praise from major game reviewers, but due to this Dreamcast slowly suffocating, not many people had a chance to play it. However, Game Arts saw that the PS2 was the way to go, figuring that the Dreamcast would be about as popular as One Direction will be to any male or female over the age of 18. Yeah, I got One Direction for ya. Anyway, Game Arts quickly ported the game over, and it was released in early 2002. However, they made the mistake of releasing it a month after the massively popular Final Fantasy X, and Square laughed all the way to the bank. This meant that the PS2 release of Grandia 2 was pretty weak, and it didn't help that the port didn't receive strong reviews from critics. This PS2 port, the most accessible version of the game, is what I'll be reviewing today. Is this the forgotten gem of the early PS2 era? Or is it just a reflection of its glorious Dreamcast predecessor? Either way, let's look at Grandia 2 for the PlayStation 2. Grandia 2 is the sequel to the PS1 classic, Grandia, and it carries a lot of the same qualities as the first game, including the strong battle system and characters. However, the developers decided that, rather than the brighter feel of the original, they were going to make the game darker. After realizing that people wouldn't be able to see the game if the screen was darker, they decided to just make the plot more mature. And what is the plot? Set in a likely different world from the original Grandia, the sequel takes place in a world shaped by a huge battle between good and evil thousands of years ago, where good apparently just beat out evil, and the church now leads the land. In the present day, Ryudo, a geohound, a fancy term for a mercenary, is a young loner who gets hired to protect Elena, a songstress of the church, on an important mission. Ryudo completes the mission without incident, and everybody goes on with their lives. Nah, of course not. Things go wrong almost immediately, as Elena gets a piece of the devil inside of her. Yeah, Ryudo's not getting a tip for this one. It's up to Ryudo and Elena to uncover the secrets of history to protect the present. The story in Grandia 2 is about on par with the first. They're both good plots without too many surprises, but they're just enough to get the job done. However, being intended for an older audience, Grandia 2 does take itself a little too seriously at some times, but that could just be personal preference. However, the quote-unquote big plot twist is hilariously predictable, and the game gets really damn cheesy, especially in the third act. Also, the messages lack subtlety like in the first. However, this game does take big risks with a heavily religiously concentrated storyline, and asks legitimate questions about the nature of evil, human morality, and how humanity has to learn to believe in the inherent human goodness. So the story gets a pass, but now let's jump into the characters. Ryudo is our protagonist, and he's a pretty memorable one at that. Starting out as a stubborn, cynical, and sarcastic loner, and slowly watching him warm up to the other characters and deal with his own issues was a believable and interesting journey. Although Ryudo had a predictable arc, what really made him a good character was his dialogue, particularly at the start of the game. For the first act, Ryudo has a really harsh relationship with Elena, acting a lot like the man himself, Han Solo. Although he softens up later on and becomes less funny, about 90% of his downright hilarious dialogue in the first part of the game can be summed up in one phrase.
Excuse me, princess.
God, how I've wanted to use that clip. Anyway, although his interactions with most other characters other than Elena are pretty bland, Ryuto still managed to be a worthy protagonist. Elena is the 100% naive and clean church girl. She's been sheltered her whole life and has a very black and white view of how the world works. However, due to the fact that she has the devil inside of her, and the world is basically going to shit, the songstress has to face the music and learn about the true nature of the world. I thought Elena was a pretty great female lead, despite the fact that many could see her as annoying. I felt that her character arc rightfully received the most attention, but the best part of her character was again her relationship with Ryuto. No, not just because of the constant insults, but how this couple really learns from each other over the course of the game, and they even each other's personalities out. That was an extremely well done portion of the game. Millennia is an incarnation of the devil, and a semi-active member of your party, mostly just jumping in when she feels like it. Being the total and utter incarnation of pure evil, who happens to be a woman, I'm just saying, Millennia is loud, irritable, and brash, making her a clear foil to Elena. Since the latter can't quite control the former's powers, the game plays around with that Jekyll-Hyde concept quite a lot, and they did a pretty good job with that as well. Millennia herself goes through a slow arc of learning human compassion, and she soon becomes the most sympathetic character of the bunch. I felt that these three characters were the heart of the game, while the rest were a little lacking. Marek is the giant beast man thing, the Gadwin of the game, and always has to yell the word SMELL for some reason. I wondered how he'd do in social situations. Smell! Tio is a robot, and her character is about as awkward and already pretty predictable. I don't have much to say about her. Ron is a little kid from a royal background, and he's so boring. Not to mention that he looks like a pansy, and I thought he was a girl at first. You know what? In fact, Ron should be a member of One Direction. Alright, enough of that. Let's jump into the gameplay. The gameplay of Grandia 2 is really similar to the first, with a heavy emphasis on exploration. Although the game only clocks in at around under 30 hours, there are a lot of creative areas to explore. The areas were very well designed, with some interesting ways to interact with the scenery and to move about. Although the puzzles in the game were pretty scarce, the game makes up for it, as getting to the next point became a puzzle in itself, which was a pretty interesting twist. I did hate how maze-like some of the areas were, and if you know me, you know I think mazes suck more than Kirby. And that compass was next to useless. I swear it was the same one Christopher Columbus used in 1492, when he was looking for Asia and found the Americas. Then, running into the natives, which he called Indians so his angry shipmates wouldn't know that he screwed up. And this was followed by centuries and centuries of bloodshed by the greedy Europeans looking to force their culture onto the Aboriginals and killed most of them off with disease. And that's why I don't want mazes and a useless friggin' compass to navigate around my PlayStation 2 game. Like the first Grandia, you can see enemies on screen, and they lead you into the battle system of the game. I really believe that the Grandia series has one of the best battle systems in the history of RPGs, as it's a great blend of active time and strategy, as you have to time your blocks correctly, as well as cancel enemy movements. With a large array of magic and individual skills for each character, the battles were a huge plus for the game. The only issue I had was with the individual customization. In the first game, you were given limited spell types to latch onto each character, and once it was on, you couldn't remove it. Then, the only way to level up your moves was by continuously using them. It was a pretty good system that made you have a really individualized character at the end of the game. Grandia 2 does something similar, but not quite as effective in my opinion. The sets of magic and skills can be switched among the characters at any time, as you can end up making a weak physical character like Elena have more HP than the Aslan and Paul Bunyan love child. This is where the game makes the same mistake as Final Fantasy VIII, as you don't really have an individualized character rather than just a set of skills. You also level up your character's skills and magic by paying for it with different types of currency received in battle, which is okay, but again, I say it's not as personalized as using a character and becoming better with those skills with that character, which better demonstrates the character growth in the story. In truth, these are probably preference gripes, as the battle system in Grandia was really good. It gave the players a good challenge with some rough boss fights that required some solid strategy. I have one thing to say about the graphics in Grandia 2, the PS2 version at least. When this game was born, it fell down the ugly tree and hit every goddamn branch. This game's graphics may be its Achilles heel. I know graphics don't make a game. Hell, ice hockey for the NES looks hilarious today, but it's still amazingly fun. But just look at how unappealing the characters model look in this game. And this is a 2002 game on the PlayStation 2. 2 years ago, Chrono Cross was released on the PlayStation 1, and it makes Grandia 2 look like Sarah Jessica Parker. Not to mention that Final Fantasy X came out and blew everybody away around the same time. This just makes the game feel slow and drawn out. Other critics rightfully bash the port for this, noting that it harms an otherwise great game, and it's true. But to be fair, the Dreamcast version looks like it plays a lot better, and this was technically a port of a 2000 game. Also, the spell animations could be pretty cool, but with all the glitches, it just took away from the experience. The levels that you visit really show off that more mature theme the game was going for. In contrast with the bright and more whimsical areas of its predecessor, the levels in Grandia 2 are mostly creepy, dark, and usually gross. It was really interesting to see what the creators chose to do with the level design, and it made for some really memorable locations. Personally though, I prefer the style of the first game, as Grandia never took itself seriously and always had that romantic dream of adventure. Grandia 2 also had a semblance of that, but with a darker tone. Kinda like this. Adventure. 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 Okay, maybe I was complaining a bit too much, because again, this is just a personal preference, and I did enjoy the style of the game too in its own way. The music in the game was pretty powerful, perhaps even better than the first. Many of the songs are upbeat and set the tone of exploration, while others caught the religious overtones of the story. The battle themes were especially well done. Noriyuki Iwadare again brings his A-game with some strong material. How about the voice acting? Well, those of you who've seen my Grandia review know that the voice acting was the atrocious little flaw the game carried.
I show no mercy! Ha ha!
No need to reopen wounds. I think it's safe to say that the voice acting in Grandia 2 was a lot stronger, with some pretty big name voice actors that truly brought this cast to life. I know others have found it lame and they think they did a bad job, but I still think it was a pretty good job, if the only reason being that it was so much better than the atrocious job done by the first game.
Elena, is something the matter? Ah, you must be the Geohound, yes? We've been waiting for you.
A Geohound?
Hey, I'm Ryudo. This here's Sky. Quite a warm welcome for someone you're hiring.
My only complaint was that I wish there was more of it. In conclusion, Grandia 2 is a solid RPG that, in my opinion, is just not quite as strong as the original. The story, dialogue, and characters are good, the battle system and exploration was well done, and the music and voice acting was strong. However, the graphics could be reminiscent of the block people in Final Fantasy VII, and the slowdown and glitches made the game a tough sell. Despite that, do I think this game is pretty underrated? This game deserves some more players, preferably those with some patience. It was still a lot of fun, despite its multitude of flaws, and it's a great addition to any RPG library. As useless as it may be to say, you're probably better off buying the Dreamcast version if you have a choice, but if you can hunt down the PS2 version, and it is relatively cheap, then you should be good to pick it up. Well, that's all for now. I'm John Tickles, and I look forward to our next random encounter.
Don't you ever clean it?
Adventure!
Excuse me, princess.